In this video, I'm going to be talking through how a bill becomes a law. And I want to emphasize, this is so important, that what I'm going to talk about is a highly simplified version of this. If you wanted to understand all of the nuances, and I'm not suggesting you do, you would need about an hour's worth of instruction. Instead, I'm going to try to do this in just a few minutes. So I'm going to start by showing you this super confusing graphic that I don't expect you to read, but I will put a link to this graphic in the notes on YouTube for this video. So if you want to look at it and kind of have it to reference, I encourage you to do so. I have added a couple of things in the House. I've added in the Rules Committee, and in the last step, when it goes to the President, he has the option of neither signing nor vetoing the bill. I'll talk about that in a moment. But let me give you a quick brief overview of the House legislative process. So in the House of Representatives, we begin by introducing a bill. Once it's introduced, it's given a bill number and description, and then it's referred out to one or more committees. This is called committee referral. The committees are going to do things like have some hearings, get some reports, maybe from the Congressional Research Service, which is a nonpartisan research arm of Congress to provide factual information about things. They might get a score from the Congressional Budget Office. So any bill that's going to have an impact on the spending of the country or the income of the country will get scored by the Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, so that lawmakers know what the financial impact of this bill will be. They might bring some people in to give some testimony or to ask questions. They might bring in members of the federal government, the bureaucracy that would implement this bill, to get some sense of how the bill might impact their work or what challenges they might have. And then the committee will debate, change any of the language that they want through a process called markup. They're going to mark up the bill. And then if it moves forward, most bills don't, but if it does, then the committee's going to take a vote, and that's called reporting the bill. So the bill will be reported out of committee either favorably, which means that a majority of the members of that committee supported it, unfavorably, meaning a majority voted against it, or we might say it was just reported out of committee if it was tied. From there, in the House of Representatives, the bill's going to go over to the Rules Committee. Now, the Rules Committee is, this is not an exaggeration, the single most important thing about the House of Representatives legislative process. Because the Rules Committee really functions as a gatekeeper to what can move forward in the House. Most committees in the House and the Senate have approximately the same percentages of majority and minority party members as are in the chamber. So right now, Democrats control the House of Representatives, as I record this in September of 2020. So there's going to be slightly more Democrats than Republicans on each of the House committees. But the Rules Committee is one that's going to decide whether or not a bill makes it to the floor. And if so, are any amendments allowed? Probably not. And if so, whose amendments, and amendments to which part of the bill. So the Rules Committee is critically important, and the leadership of the House is going to want to make sure that the Rules Committee is doing what the House leaders want it to do, the majority party leaders. For that reason, the Rules Committee is going to have an even larger percentage of majority party members than minority party members to ensure that if one or two people in the majority peel off, they're still going to have a majority vote. After the Rules Committee proceeds, then it will go to the Calendar Committee to get scheduled, and then we'll have some floor action. During floor action, there will be, if the Rules Committee allowed, there might be some amendments, there will be some debate. It'll be equally divided between the majority and the minority, and members of the House who want to speak on the floor in support of or opposition to the bill will do so. And then once that wraps up, the House will take a vote. Remember what I said, everything in the House happens on a majority basis. And so in order for this bill to pass, you need a majority of House members, or 218 members, in order for the bill to advance. So that's what's going on in the House. The House doesn't have to act first unless it's a bill that requires taxes. So anything that raises revenue, which is a way of saying raises taxes or deals with taxes, must begin in the House of Representatives. That's a provision in Article 1 of the Constitution, and it was put there to ensure that if the government was going to ask the citizens to pay taxes, that the part of the government that's closest to the people, the House of Representatives, would be the ones to initiate that. So on all other matters, the House can start, but the Senate could begin, or they could be happening at the same time. There's no rule that everything has to start in the House. Over in the Senate, things are a little bit less strict because there are way fewer members, 435 versus 100. 100 is much easier to corral. So in the Senate, it starts off the same. A bill is introduced. It gets given a name and a number, and it gets referred out to one or more committees. The committees are going to do the same kinds of things. They'll hear some testimony, maybe have some hearings, do some debate, get some reports, ask some questions, get a CBO score to see what the financial impact will be. And then they'll take a vote and report it out of committee, favorably, unfavorably, or just report it. From there, notice that in the Senate, it does not go to a Rules Committee because there is no Senate Rules Committee that functions like the House. It just gets calendared, and then usually the Senate Majority Leader, who is the leader of the majority party of the Senate, currently Republicans control the Senate, so that is Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell will decide when he wants to bring that item up on the floor. So he'll introduce it on the floor. The same rules apply here in that you can offer amendments, you can debate, but the thing that's different in the Senate is that we always have the possibility of a filibuster. So what's a filibuster? The filibuster is when you try to stop passage of a bill by talking it to death. So in the Senate, there are basically two ways that a bill can die. It could never make it to the floor, or it could get filibustered. Now, rarely does the filibuster actually kill a bill. It's more often the case that the threat of a filibuster will kill a bill. If Mitch McConnell knows that he doesn't have the votes to prevent a filibuster, then he just won't bring it up on the floor to avoid the embarrassment of, or the distraction of, a filibuster, unless he thinks that it's going to benefit his party to show that the other party, in this case that would be the Democrats, are just delay. It's a political gamble, though. In order to prevent a filibuster on most things in the Senate, you need to have 60 votes to stop debate. Okay, now why? Well, remember over in the House, we have a Rules Committee that decides what the rules for debate are going to be, including a time limit on debate. But in the Senate, there is no Rules Committee. There is no automatic decision when a bill comes up about how long we're going to debate this for. In order to stop debate so that we can move to that last step of a vote, you need 60 votes. Currently, the Republicans in the Senate have 53 votes if they all stick together. So that means they're going to need some Democrats to agree, we're ready to go ahead and vote on this. But if you're a Democrat and you don't want this bill to pass, why would you vote to stop debate? You wouldn't. And so that's where the filibuster comes in. The filibuster is an effort by a minority of senators to basically exhaust the rest of them into saying, fine, I give up. The rules for a filibuster are that you must remain standing and you must remain talking. For the first 2 hours of your talking on the Senate floor, you have to be on the topic of the bill. But after that, you can talk about whatever you want for as long as you want, as long as you can remain standing and remain talking. You can yield for questions, but you can't ask for a timeout to go to the bathroom or to sit down. And so if you want to talk for a really long time, you need to plan this in advance and think very carefully about how much liquid and food you take in. Because when nature calls, you can't just hit a timeout. You can, however, request a quorum call. And a quorum is the minimum number of people who need to be present for the chamber to do their job. Now, the quorum is important because we wouldn't want a situation where 23 senators could sneak into the Senate chamber in the dead of night and pass a bill and say, well, I mean, you guys weren't here, so we just had to do it without you. A quorum is usually a majority of the members. So if you're filibustering and you're looking out over the Senate chamber and there are 12 people in the room, you can call for a point of order and ask the chair to determine whether there's a quorum present. If there's not, then you can take a break. You can sit down, you can take a drink of water, maybe even run to the restroom while they get at least 50 senators into the chamber, and then you can resume talk. So when somebody wants to filibuster, if you are in the majority party but you don't have the votes to stop them, you want to make sure all your people are in the seats, because you don't want to give the person who's enacting this filibuster strategy an opportunity to restore and recharge themselves. You want to wait it out and get it over with. I want to give you some quick statistics about the most recent full 2-year term of the House and the Senate. So in 2017-2018, the 115th Congress, in the House, they introduced 7,500 bills, of which about 15%, or about 1,100, passed. Over the course of those 2 years, they were in session for a total of 384 days. So those are days where meetings are happening, business is happening in Washington, D.C. So that's what, like 190 or so per year. And that may sound like, that's a pretty cush job. What are they doing the rest of the year? But those are just days that they're in D.C. doing the actual legislative work. Members of Congress don't really have like time off. When they're not in DC, they're at home, they're talking to constituents, meeting with citizen groups, trying to find out what's going on and what the people are asking of them to do in Congress. So I don't want you to see that and think, wow, they take half the year off. They don't. Those are just days that they're actually in DC doing that work. Most members of Congress live where they in the districts that they represent, and they commute to Congress. So currently here in Chattanooga, and I live in Monteagle, our members of the House, Chuck Fleischman and Scott Desjardins, they take the direct flight from the Chattanooga airport up to DC, usually on Monday morning, and come back Thursday night or Friday morning, most weeks. And so, you know, they're here during the weekend, and they're meeting with constituents, working in their offices, etc. All told, the House in that 2-year period had about 1,800 committee meetings. So I want you to take a look at this number of bills introduced, 7,542. Compare it with the same numbers for the Senate. The Senate is about half as productive in terms of introducing legislation, but they're a fourth of the size. Well, a little less than a fourth. They also pass a much smaller number. In the House, it was 1,162. In the Senate, in the same time, it's 583, about half. This is because it's so much harder to pass a bill in the Senate because of that 60-vote rule to cut off debate. And so we really see that the House can be much more active because they have that simple majority rule. When you don't have to consult with the minority party on anything, and you don't need any of them to help you to make this across the finish line, then you can do whatever you want. But in the Senate, there are incentives there that push the majority party towards a more bipartisan posture. I don't want to suggest that it's all kumbaya, holding hands and hugging in the Senate. It's not. It's still partisan. But there are incentives built into the structures of the Senate that push members towards some collaboration, some compromise. Getting rid of the filibuster would mean that there are even fewer incentives for that in the Senate, And that would mean that, yeah, they could get a lot more done, but it would be completely ignoring any of the minority voices in that chamber, regardless of who's in power. Okay, so this is a longer video, but I wanted to talk you through this process. Let me go back really quickly because I want to circle back to that thing that I mentioned at the beginning. Once the House and the Senate have passed the same exact version of the same bill, which sometimes does require them to go to a conference committee, which is made up of members of the House and the Senate, to resolve language differences between their two bills. Once they've done that and it's passed by both chambers, it goes to the president, who basically has three options. He can sign the bill and it becomes a law. Yay! He can veto the bill. Usually a presidential veto means it's dead, because to override a veto, you need 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to agree. And that's really hard. So barring a veto override, the bill is dead here. But the president can also choose to do nothing. And what happens when the president does nothing depends on whether he does nothing while Congress is still formally in session, or if he does it when they've adjourned for a recess. Whew, it's complicated. So if the president gets a bill and he sits on it for 10 business days, so basically 10 days not including Sunday, I think it's 10, might be 12, I think it's 10. 10 days not including Sundays, and Congress is still working, then the bill becomes a law without his signature. So that's what can happen if the president doesn't want to veto it because maybe it's really popular, but he doesn't like it. So he'll just do nothing and it'll eventually become a law, but he didn't personally endorse it. If the president does nothing and Congress has adjourned, like say for Christmas break or something, or for the August recess, which they take often to go home and campaign. So if he does nothing and 10 days, not including Sundays, pass, where Congress is gone, then that's called a pocket veto. So he didn't actually veto it in a proactive way. He just did nothing and let it quietly slip away. A pocket veto cannot be overridden. So the president might do that if this is something that's relatively popular with the people. So it would be a bad political move for him to veto it. But he also doesn't want Congress to be able to marshal the resources to override him. So pocket vetoes don't happen that often, but they can happen. And that's the final step. Now, of course, you should now go watch I'm Just a Bill from Schoolhouse Rock, which gives you an even bigger zoom out, but with music.